Greetings everyone, good afternoon, mabuhay, sawadi tombay, salamat siyang, konnichiwa, and magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. My name is James Deakin, and I'll be your host for this highly anticipated virtual webinar, Nissan Futures, Electrification, and as Buzz Lightyear would say, beyond. That's right, we are going overdrive today. And just a little bit about myself, I'm a car fanatic, a multimedia automotive journalist for the last 20 years, and I'm coming at you live from the fun capital of the world, the Philippines. So shout out to all my kababayans and of course all of our ASEAN neighbors. I'm very pleased to be your host and moderator for today. Now, just a little bit about Nissan Futures. It's an event series that brings in subject experts from all around the world. This is just to discuss the future of mobility. Now, since 2018, the Japanese automaker has organized the ASEAN Nissan Futures event in Singapore and Hong Kong. I hosted the Singapore one. I got to meet a lot of people there, got to learn a lot. And today, well, we're very excited to welcome you all for this virtual event. And we have participants from 23 countries worldwide. How exciting is that? Now, just a little disclaimer, I don't speak 23 languages, but let me give you a few tips and tricks just before we start. The webinar will be broadcast in English, but if you join through Zoom, you also have the option to listen to the audio in Thai and in Bahasa Indonesia. Now, in Zoom, all you have to do is go to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, just click Interpretation, and then select your language. And you should just see that all there on your buttons on Zoom. I want to know if it works. Let me know if it works. It would be very important to know that, because that would be very cool. Now, if it doesn't work, just please make sure that you do have the latest version of Zoom installed on your device, okay? We'd love to hear from you throughout the session, so if you do have questions for any one of our speakers, you can simply ask your questions through the Q&A function, also at the bottom of your screen. There's a lot to go through today. We'll be discussing a lot of interesting content today, and especially for our media friends, you'll find press releases, infographics, and other content on the Nissan Newsroom. They will be published right after the presentations. That's going to be around 2 p.m. Thailand time, 3 p.m. For the Philippines and other regions. Simply go to asia.nissannews.com/futures. You should see it there on the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and you should get all the materials that you need to know or need to create your stories about. And finally, well, this is pretty exciting. We have a graphic recorder. Mr. Elliot Lee is from a company called sketchpost.com. Hi, Elliot.
Hello.
You look like
Hi,
a real
James.
person. You don't look like a drawing. That's great. Very happy to see that. And Elliot has, he's going to be doing some very nice content for us because he's going to be capturing these special moments in animation or in pictures, and he's going to be sketching it out. And so it's very, very cool. I think it's going to add a little bit of spice, a little bit of animation into our webinar today. Okay, so look out for that. We have ourselves here. You can see already we have, that's not my best side, but you know, I'll let it go. I'll let it go for now, Elliot. And maybe if you can scrub off 5 or 10 pounds, we can be really good friends after this, all right? Now,
Sounds like
we'll
a
check
plan.
in with you a little later on, Elliot. Without further ado, let's start our session. I know a lot of people are eager to learn, eager to join. So our first speaker will be addressing us live from the regional Nissan R&D Center in Thailand. And he has more than 20 years of experience in the automotive sector all across the world. Now, since this year, he has been overseeing Nissan's growth strategy in ASEAN, including the company's regional electrification efforts, which is why we pretty much brought him on board here to discuss. So, ladies and gentlemen, please let me welcome Mr. Isao Sekiguchi, Regional Vice President, Nissan ASEAN.
Thank you, James, for the introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining this virtual edition of Nissan Futures today. It's an honor to speak in front of you. We're here today to find an answer for a daring question. Electrifying 250 million cars, is that indeed an impossible dream? But why? Why would we want to electrify 250 million cars in the first place? Well, let me provide my perspectives. ASEAN is a very dynamic region. it is home to a fast-growing middle class. From 650 million people today, the ASEAN region will reach over 700 million people in the coming years. It's also a very young region, with the median age below 34 years old, active people who want to go out and explore. Owning a car gives them that opportunity. It provides them convenience and a safe way to commute. In fact, many consumers here are the first ones in their family to own a vehicle. Simply said, the demand for personal mobility is real. Yet, at the same time, the stress on big cities in this region is also real. We are all familiar with the pollution in our mega cities. I myself have lived in Jakarta for 2 years, and now addressing this you from Bangkok, Thailand. Great, vibrant places, but also congested. And let's be honest, combating pollution challenges. The World Health Organization has labeled air pollution as the greatest environmental risk to health. And less in the public eye, more in the public ear if you want, is noise pollution. Transportation produces an average high of 83 decibel noise level in key ASEAN cities. That is equivalent to a noisy food blender or an alarm clock. Extended exposure to these sound levels can cause hearing issues. So while electrified mobility is not the solution to every problem, they are cleaner and produce much less noise than traditional vehicles. They help make our cities a better place to live. Globally, electrified vehicles of all kinds are moving from the adopter phase to mainstream adoption twice as fast as we have previously seen. And here in Southeast Asia, the new study from the reputable research company Frost Sullivan shows a clear demand as well. 2 in 3 consumers across ASEAN say they will inevitably adopt electrified mobility as part of their lives in the near future. This is largely because consumers in this region want to be greener. Vivek from Frost Sullivan will talk about this more in a minute. And of course, this shifting mindset is not just good for us, the current generation, but also for future generations. Besides that, electric motor-driven vehicles are fun to drive. Think fast acceleration, instant torque, and even one-pedal driving. If you haven't tried it yet, get in touch with us, and we will let you experience it yourself. So if we indeed aim to electrify all cars on ASEAN roads, the question that comes up is, who should lead the move towards electrifying our cars? Car makers like us, Nissan, other private parties, or governments? Well, I say everyone. The EV adoption is being accelerated by forward-thinking governments and cities around the world. Aggressive targets to prohibit sales of new vehicles with internal combustion engines are set for point in the future, some as early as 2030. On the other hand, of course, automotive companies need to make electrified mobility broadly available. Nissan's electrified vehicles and technologies support and enhance our customers' lifestyles. We help customers contribute and live in a more connected, sustainable, and resilient society. In doing so, we built on our more than 70 years of experience and proven track record in vehicle electrification. That's more than any other company. Words are meaningless without actions. We expand our lineup of fully electric cars and e-power vehicles for the benefit of our customers. Over the past years, we have introduced electrified vehicles across Southeast Asia, and Hong Kong. The new Nissan Leaf, the world's first mass-market EV, is available in ASEAN, in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, as well as in Hong Kong. We are excited to bring it to customers in Indonesia and also to Philippines within the coming months. Yet, we understand that consumers may still have range anxiety. They wonder, will I make it to the next charging station? Therefore, Nissan's electrification strategy goes beyond BEV. Nissan's unique e-power technology makes the benefits and enjoyment of all electric driving accessible for all. It gives consumers the EV driving experience, but without the need of charge. It's the perfect transition from full EV for the region like ASEAN, where charging infrastructure is still in development. We offer these electrified powertrains in more and more of our vehicles across many markets. Just in the last 3 months alone, e-Power has received 12 awards in this region. An example, a Serena e-Power has been very well received in Singapore and Hong Kong. And Thailand was the first country worldwide to launch the Kicks e-Power, quickly followed by Singapore and Indonesia. And I am excited to announce that we will be bringing all new Note e-Power to Hong Kong and Singapore within the coming months. More than products, we invest in the ASEAN's ecosystem. We made the multi-billion baht investment in e-power technology production in Thailand. This makes our ASEAN hub for the first market after Japan to manufacture e-power technology, and including for the export to Japan. That not only demonstrates the quality of our teams and supplies here, but also importance of electrified mobility for Nissan in ASEAN and beyond. And speaking of beyond, our offer goes beyond mobility. From powering homes and business to providing emergency electricity, Nissan is offering and developing technologies that support drivers, communities, and society as a whole. We foresee a future whereby cars are integrated seamlessly in the energy grid, a future in which your car is your home's energy backup, for an example, in case of natural disasters, a future in which you can give power back and even make money from your EV. Now, to wrap up, Nissan is delivering on its commitment to making electrified mobility more accessible to more people in ASEAN. As a Japanese company, Nissan is drawing on its pioneering spirit, decades of electric vehicle R&D, and learning from our customers what works and what does not. But we cannot do it alone. We are working with partners around the world to develop the supply chains, infrastructure, and innovations that will enable more people to enjoy the benefits of electric driving. Events like these are vital to help drive the conversation forward. Together, we have the power to drive the future. So let's go out and let's do it together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Sekiguchi-san, for the very inspiring presentation. So much to get excited about there, and we will be talking to Sekiguchi-san a little bit later on. I particularly want to know more about the power to grid, where you can put the power back to the grid using your Nissan Leaf. I've seen it in action in Japan. That opens up all new possibilities, especially for countries, developing nations like the Philippines, who also suffer from natural disasters and have limited access to charging stations. But more on that a little bit later. I do not want to get ahead of myself here, because our next speaker knows everything about the demand for electrified vehicles in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. He's a well-known expert on future mobility scenarios, regulations, and competitive strategies, mostly because he and his team have conducted the study, The Future of Electrified Vehicles in Southeast Asia. So he's well placed to be able to give us his opinion, especially for our region. Let's all welcome Mr. Vivek Vaidya, Associate Partner, Senior Vice President, Intelligent Mobility, Frost Sullivan, Asia Pacific. Vivek?
Thank you, James. Thank you very much for this great introduction, and Sekiguchi-san, very impressive presentation. So I thank Nissan for giving me this opportunity to speak at this event, and I wish them a very successful event, Nissan Futures. I'm very sure with the virtual event, you'll be able to reach out to even more number of people, and this event will be extremely successful. Let's get on with my study. So, I'm going to talk about what my study is all about in the section Engagement Overview. Then I'll talk about what is the understanding of the customers in this region about electric vehicles and electrified vehicles. And I'm also going to explain the difference between electric and electrified vehicles. Then we studied what are the key factors for adoption and barriers for adoption for electrified vehicles. Then we looked at electrified vehicles, which is Nissan Power. What is the attractiveness in the minds of the customers, what they like, what they don't like. And then comes the most interesting part of this study, which is my personal favorite, which is profile of electrified vehicle intenders. So we identified psychographic profile of customers who look at the same electric vehicle from different angles. And then I will talk about conclusions. Moving on. So let's look at the objective of the study. Our objective of the study was to understand the usage, attitude, and perceptions of intenders of electric vehicles as their private transportation in Southeast Asia. So these are electrified vehicles, and they intend to own it as a personal vehicle. So we'll measure their awareness levels of electrified vehicles. So how much do they know about the technologies? What are their top of the mind associations? What do they know about these vehicles, etc. Then we looked at what are the important factors for electrification and the perceptions, and how will they go about selecting the vehicles? What are those things which will trigger them to select these vehicles? Then we looked at what are the likelihood of future purchases, and finally we looked at what are the awareness and perceptions about Nissan e-Power. We spoke to 3,000 customers, rather 3,000 individuals who are intenders of electrified vehicles across 600 countries in Southeast Asia, and we also spoke to about 500 customers in Hong Kong, and I've listed the results of that study separately in the same presentation. So we spoke to 6 countries, which are Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Moving on. So firstly, we checked whether the customers are aware of electrified vehicles. And although the penetration of electrified vehicles in this region is very less, the awareness of the customers is very high. So when we say electric vehicle, 87% of the customers associated that with battery electric vehicle. So battery electric vehicle is the one where it has only battery, no engines, and it works on the charge. Whereas 37% associated that with plug-in hybrids, 37% associated that with full hybrids, and about 30% associated that with e-Power, or what we called as mild hybrid. Now, we conducted the same study, exactly the same study in 2018, and we see a substantial improvement, about 4 to 7% points in the association with electric vehicles. Now, this talks very highly about all the electric vehicle companies who are creating awareness about electric vehicles in the minds of the customers. Here, I'll also like to highlight what is the difference between electric and electrified vehicles. So if you look at battery electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid, and e-Power vehicles, these are classified as electrified vehicles because These vehicles, when fully charged, run fully on battery and they do not use any engine and therefore no tailpipe emission. Only when these vehicles get discharged, plug-in hybrid vehicles switch over to engine mode and the engine drives them to the nearest point. Whereas in e-power, you have a small charger who charges the battery, and with that, you can actually reach the next charging point. So BEV, PHEV, as well as e-power, when they run on full charge, they emit absolutely no tailpipe emission, and therefore that is called as electrified vehicles. We have used this terminology throughout this presentation. So let's look at what are the customers saying. So 1 in 3 customers say that they're almost certain to consider purchasing electrified vehicles as their next car purchase in 3 years. Now, the total average stands at about 37%. Now, this, mind you, this is on the back of COVID-19. In COVID-19, what all happened? 1, people lost their jobs. Number 2, there were reduction in income, there were layoffs, people were working from home, and more importantly, the oil prices reached all-time low. Whenever oil prices go low, the demand for alternate fuels or electric vehicles actually comes down. But despite that, we are quite impressed to see that 1 in 3 customers still consider electric vehicle as one of the vehicles they would consider next year. Now, because of the COVID situation, we reckon that the numbers came down from 51% in 2018 to 37%, but there is one more factor that we should consider, and which is Vietnam. If you see the Vietnam numbers, which in 2018 were 73%, which dropped down to about 22%. So that also has an impact on the overall numbers of purchase consideration for next year. So the top 3 countries are Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, who have shown higher inclination to adopt the electrification and consider next vehicle as the electrified vehicle. So we looked at what are the different factors that are playing on their minds when it comes to purchasing the electric vehicle. So very interestingly, better safety standards stands out the first. And it was the same factor that was at the top of the chart even in 2018, which means the technology is still not proven. The customers still need to be educated about vehicles being safe. They have several considerations. How will the vehicle perform in case of accident, in case of flooding? So one needs to educate the customers based on safety standards. The second important factor is environmental awareness. 47% of the customers say that this is an important or top of the mind factor when they consider electric vehicles. And then comes lower cost of charging the EV, lower maintenance, etc. So one important point I must highlight is electric vehicle, the top 2 factors are emotional in nature. Better safety standards is emotional in nature. Environmental awareness is emotional in nature. So for electric vehicles, emotional factors still dominate rather than the factors that appeal to the brain, which are lower cost of charging, lower maintenance costs. So the communication for electric vehicle has to target the heart rather than the brain. Let's move on. We also looked at what are the things that must change for customers to adopt to electric vehicle. 2018 as well as 2020, we found that tax benefits stand as number 1. So governments need to play the role. Governments need to make sure that the vehicle is made attractive for the customers. We also don't look at tax benefits as just tax benefit, but we look at how active the government is and how positively predisposed they are towards the electric vehicle. Because the government communication and their attitude towards electric vehicle has seemed to made a big difference. Be it China, be it Norway, government has been the major driving factor for customers to adopt electric vehicle. So it's no different in ASEAN, no different in Southeast Asia. So governments need to play an important role for governments for the customers to make a switch from IC engine to electric vehicles. The second important point is the charging infrastructure. About 75% of the customers say that the charging infrastructure needs to be available. They also mention that the charging infrastructure needs to be available at the residential buildings, which means the customers are involved. This is probably the most practical solution to have a charging infrastructure. After these two main factors, you see SOPs, which are general electric vehicle non-financial benefits, which are priority lanes, parking, toll discounts, or concessions in locations of parking. So these are more of SOPs, which are considered as attractive benefits. But there is a big difference between top two benefits and other four benefits, which indicates that unless governments change their attitude, provide tax benefit, provide positive reinforcement for buying electrification, and the charging infrastructure is available for the customers to see, they will not really go for. So other factors are not so important. Top two factors being government focus as well as charging infrastructure. So these need to be taken care of for the customers to make a switch from IC engines to electric vehicles. Interestingly, source of electricity also matters to the customers. We did not expect this. This is a surprising finding for us. But in both years, about 81% of the customers on an average mentioned that source of electricity is an important point of consideration. What we learn from other countries is wherever the renewable energies production is higher, electrification or electrified cars are higher. So which means both of them go hand in hand. So for governments to focus on electrified vehicles, they should also talk about what is the source of energy. If their focus is on renewable energy, then that needs to be highlighted because that is going to have a very positive rub-off on electrification of vehicles. Interestingly, same three countries, which I highlighted in previous slide, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia, have also shown higher consideration for the source of electricity. So what we are likely to conclude is, as of now, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia are three countries which are showing maximum positive predisposition towards electric vehicles. Now let's look at what are the barriers for adoption. Now, interestingly, we had exactly conducted the same study in 2018. And we had asked the respondents about same barriers. So the top 6 barriers have remained the same. They haven't changed. But what has changed is the extent of barriers have significantly lowered down. So they have lowered down anywhere between 10 to 14% in each case. So fear of running out of power, number one consideration, still remains number one, but the barrier has been lowered from 60% to 48%. Similarly, limited availability of public charging infrastructure has been lowered from 54% to 45%. Same is the consideration about safety of electric vehicle technology, lowered from 55 to 43. So as you go on around the hexagon, you will see that every single barrier has been lowered, and which is a great positive development for adoption of EV. So which means, although we don't see so many electric vehicles on the road, the customers have changed their attitude towards the electric vehicles. Let's move on. So let's look at e-power as a technology and how attractive that is. So we ask the customers, what do they like about e-power? So fast and smooth acceleration was number one, hands down. Also eliminating the need for external charger, number 2. Then comes noiseless driving, high engine output as compared to other EVs. Then comes maximum driving speed of 160 kilometers per hour, so on and so forth. What struck me the most is top 3 factors. If you see fast and smooth acceleration, elimination of external charger, and noiseless driving are all emotional factors as far as e-power is concerned. All the rational factors as power output, maximum speed, size of fuel tank, all of these come later. So this highlights that even e-power, the consideration that appeal to the customers most are emotional in nature. So this needs to be considered by EV players, by Nissan, as well as by governments, that it's the emotional factors that play an important role as far as the customers are concerned and EVs are concerned. Let's move on. We looked at what is e-power's ability to eliminate external charger, which is the most positive consideration. So Philippines records 57% of the customers say that this is the most important factor, which is a solution for range anxiety. Indonesia, again, 49%, and Thailand says 45%. Average stands at 43%. This tells me that Nissan can further focus on educating the customers about this particular feature. I see a big positive range for growing customers' positive predisposition towards Nissan e-Power by educating the customers about this feature, which eliminates the need for external charger and therefore dependence on charging infrastructure. At just 43%, I see another 57% room to grow as far as this particular feature is concerned. Then I'll quickly touch upon Hong Kong. It was the same questionnaire and it was the same considerations that Hong Kong customers have also displayed. But the acceptance of electric vehicle in Hong Kong is a tad higher. So 1 in 2 customers in Hong Kong say that they will move to electrified mobility and they see it as inevitable. 28% of them say that they are almost certain to consider their next vehicle as electrified mobility. The considerations about motivating factors are the same. Better safety standards, 43% of the customers said that, and options for a fast charging of electric vehicle was stood at 29%, which was another motivating factor for Hong Kong customers. It is no doubt that Hong Kong customers seem to be more exposed to electric vehicles than the Southeast Asian counterparts. Top 3 incentives that Hong Kong customers would like to see to switch to electrified vehicles are again tax incentives, no surprises there, then charging infrastructure in the residential areas, same as Southeast Asia, and free parking. If one of you have gone to Hong Kong and have parked a vehicle there, you know how important this feature is. Therefore, 60% of the customers have said that if they provide free parking for electric vehicle, that will actually help them to adopt to electric vehicle faster. Most significant barriers are range anxiety and perceived high maintenance costs. So this maintenance cost actually comes from the cost of changing the battery at the end of the life. Otherwise, the maintenance cost of electric vehicle is quite less. And finally, Hong Kong customers, what do they like about e-Power? Same near noiseless driving experience, which also shows that they have actually test driven the vehicle a lot more, and ability to eliminate the external charging is another important factor which Hong Kong customers have liked about e-Power. Then let's move to, as I mentioned, one of the most interesting and my favorite part of the study, which is profiling of electrified vehicle intenders. So what we do is we ask the customers about their psychographic profile, which means we ask the customers about how do they think about electric vehicle. And based on their answers, we classify them into 3 different clusters. The first cluster is what we call as basic utility drivers. These customers like electric vehicle because it saves the cost from going from place A to place B, because the electric vehicle is cheaper when it runs than petrol and diesel counterpart. The second group is environmentalists, which means they like electric vehicles because of their zero tailpipe emission. They consider this solution to be much greener as far as the cities are concerned, because they don't emit any tailpipe. And the third type of customers, we call them trendy enthusiasts. these are the customers who look at electric vehicle as a cool gadget. It's a new technology vehicle. It is likely to have new features. It is likely to have a touch screen. It will be a connected car. You can do a lot of things when you're sitting in the car, so on and so forth. Now, what is most interesting and how does it compare to our 2018 study? As compared to 2018, the basic utility drivers have come down by 4 percentage points, which means those customers who look at electric vehicle as a basic utility vehicle has come down. And environmental awareness has gone up by 4%. So the customers who look at electric vehicle as a greener solution has gone up by 4 percentage points. And trendy enthusiasts has remained more or less the same. So what is even more interesting is about close to 80% of the customers don't look at electric vehicle as a basic utility vehicle. They either look at it as a cool gizmo, the new gadget that they would like to own, or the environmentally friendly solution that they would like to own. So, which means, again, to highlight third time, electric vehicles appeal to the emotions of the customers, and even the customer segments who have shown highest appeal are either trendy enthusiast or environmentalist customers. So we are coming towards the end of my presentation. So let me conclude everything that I mentioned to you so far. So key takeaways are the customers' awareness about electrified vehicle has gone up significantly. Their association with different types of vehicle is at an all-time high and has shown significant increase over our 2018 study. Despite COVID-19 pandemic, the enthusiasm towards electric vehicle is unabated. There are significant number of customers, 1 in 3 customers who have shown propensity to consider electric vehicle as for their next purchase within the next 3 years. Better safety standards, greater environmental awareness, and lower cost of charging and maintenance are the things that will keep electric vehicle most attracted to the customers. And customers will get attracted because of that. And most motivating factors are these when it comes to purchase of the vehicle. What do others need to do? Tax benefits and providing charging infrastructure. These two factors are probably the most important factors that need to be taken care of before we see a takeoff of electric vehicle in Southeast Asian region. There is a significant improvement in customer perception towards barriers of adoption, which are range anxiety, or these are some of the factors. So range anxiety and other deterrents have come down significantly. And finally, greater environmental awareness has gone up. Trendy enthusiast segment has gone up, and electric vehicle is being seen as more innovative, cool, trendy vehicle which portrays luxury and exclusivity. Thank you very much for patient listening, and I welcome all the questions in our interaction session. And back to you, James. Thank you.
Well, thank you too very much, Mr. Vivek Vaidya, the Associate Partner, Senior Vice President, Intelligent Mobility, Frost Sullivan, Asia Pacific. Okay, as I did promise you a lot to unpack, and I'm sure you're probably overwhelmed right now, but don't worry, we've got our own little system of how to help you digest it a lot easier. And we'll do that in the form of a Q&A, and we'll do it in the form of a forum as well. So we'll be discussing the results of that in more detail in our panel discussions. Again, participants are invited to ask your questions through the Q&A function right here on Zoom. So I'm sure you got some burning questions. Put it down there. We will process them in, and hopefully I'll get to your question and read them out. Now, on to today's topic. We've heard from our speakers that ASEAN is set to have 250 million cars on the road, which is good news is that consumers across Southeast Asia are continuing to show these high enthusiasm to own an electric vehicle or an electrified vehicle. And this can help reduce the stress on our cities. We've heard about the noise pollution. We've heard about the numerous benefits. And at the same time, adoption of electrified vehicles is relatively low compared to the other regions. So what does it take to spur the adoption of electrified mobility? You see, these are the big questions we want to ask. And who should take the lead in driving these change? Or will electrifying 250 million cars forever remain an impossible dream? Well, why don't we discuss that together? That's what we're here for. And for that, I'd like to invite our speakers, Sekiguchi-san and Mr. Vaidya, to join us again. And I would also like to invite our other honorable speakers. Mr. Dusit Anantarak is senior expert in the Office of the Industrial Economics under the Ministry of Industry in Thailand. Dusit is an expert in developing government policies to advance electrified mobility in Thailand. We're very, very honored to have you here with us today. A warm welcome to you, Dusit. Also, Mr. Edmund Araga is president of the Asian Federation of Electric Vehicle Associations, as well as the president of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, or EVAP. Mr. Araga is an advocate of securing electrified mobility solutions in the Philippines and the region. He also happens to be what we call a kababayan, because we're from the same country. A warm welcome to you too, Mr. Araga.
Good afternoon.
Let's do the 2020 elbow bump. Keep that nice and steady. All right, gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. I don't have enough space here to fit in all that information, but there's so much to digest. So why don't I go through a series of questions? Perhaps I'll start with Sekiguchi-san, then maybe I'll get a reaction from one of you. We'll move on. We'll take some readers' questions. We'll rinse, we'll repeat until we all are satisfied and get the answers we need. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Good.
All right, great. Sekiguchi-san, you're in the hot seat. You're first. Let's ask you, what do you see as the opportunity for electrified mobility in ASEAN?
Well, it's easy to say there's a big opportunity. We didn't talk about, the population growth and accordingly the market growth expansion in this region. There's a great momentum there. But I think, I'll just echo what Vivek mentioned and the finding in his study. The people in this region especially is becoming more greener. And the important point is the people is having a more emotional ties with the cars. What EV offers is not just giving the cleaner solution to the problems that you have mentioned earlier, air pollution, noise pollution, but there is also the other aspect of fun to drive. So I believe there is a notion of growing needs, and people are passionate about what the EV or electrified vehicle can offer on a day-to-day drives. And I think, what is important, and we probably got to go and talk about, is the combination of what the automakers can do and what the private and the government sectors can provide to really enhance this entire electrification, understanding the global climate and specific pollution issues that we have in this region. Government has a lot of area to play with that. And, but, one example, Vivek talked about the incentives and some of the attributes on how we can make a breakthrough together. I'll give you one example. Indonesian government, especially Jakarta, is trying to provide a number plate free for all the electric vehicles. People get to drive, have an even and odd days numbers like in China to reduce the traffic jam. But if you have the EV, you can drive on any days. That kind of incentives that provides and takes away the stress and anxiety by having an electric vehicle will also incentivize to really grow the electrification. So there's a lot of opportunities. We just need to find the key ingredients that would allow the EV or electrified cars to fly. But again, automotive maker cannot do it alone. It has to have a combination and a support and a collaboration among the government and private companies.
And that is exactly why we're having this particular forum, to achieve exactly what you just said, to create that conversation, drive it forward, and find out how we can grow this and get to that impossible dream of 250 million cars electrified. I like how you put the emotional quotient into it, that I'm feeling very positive about people getting more excited about the emotional quotient. Perhaps I can ask Edmund. Edmund, what's your take on the same question?
Well, I have to agree with the presentation of Sir Vivek and Sekiguchi-san. So, ASEAN market has a lot of potentials and is considered as an emerging market as it boasts to a lot of factors, namely population, technology, government initiatives, and established standards. No, on population, growing numbers of young professionals in the region, on an average age of 25 to 32 years old, has the capacity to adapt changes and always find a convenient way to make a living, has the urgency on innovation and trends, especially on mobility. In terms of technology, millennials' interest to technology integrates to different gadget application available in addressing convenience and saving time approach on their daily activities. Internet of Things plays a big role on their connectivity and convenience. And in terms of government initiatives, plays a major role to implement such opportunity in addressing public transportation with a more systematic approach, for the purpose of traceability, safety, and security of the commuters. And such regulations will be the key in establishing the EV industry as a whole in providing incentives or subsidy programs for manufacturers, EV users, and the like, in creating a potential approach within the place infrastructure would be most beneficial in creating supply chain of things from the vehicle to its charging stations to job generations. And in terms of establishing standards, at present, our association, AFEBA, was able to work with UNEP, or United Nations Environmental Program, on its International Climate Initiatives program on policy guidelines for 2 to 3 wheel vehicles on a regionalized approach in escalating it to member country government agencies in handling its standards. Also, member countries were prepared on establishing standard protocols through adoptions of international standards in place.
Wow. What I'm getting here is that it's there's just so many different solutions to apply, and obviously, hearing from Vivek's presentation, actually everyone's presentation, there's different things to do in different areas. I mean, there's not one brush that paints it all, the solution, right? So perhaps I can address this to Vivek. If there's one, I know it's a difficult question, okay, but if there was one universal trigger that would get more consumers to switch to an electrified vehicle, what would you say that one universal is in the ASEAN region?
The price differential between a normal electric vehicle, normal IC engine vehicle and electric vehicle, if it comes down to about 25-30%, then we'll see a wider adoption. Because all these emotional factors will generate the awareness, but when it comes to actually going and making a purchase, the customers will look at the price, and if either by tax incentives or because of the technology advancements or because of some new business models which allow you to, say, lease the battery, etc., if the price differential between the IC engine and the electric vehicle comes down to a manageable level, we will see a big flurry of adoption of electric vehicles in Southeast Asia.
Okay, great. You can see I've got my glasses on here. This means that we're up for readers' questions. The font is small, that's why. What are the challenges? This is coming, by the way, from the Philippines. This is from a friend of mine, too, who happens to be in the industry, Lester D's on Power Wheels magazine. What are the challenges facing Nissan in electrifying mobility in the Philippines? But let's extend it also to ASEAN, because we have 23 countries tuned in right now. And what are the steps being taken by Nissan to overcome the challenges? I'll pose this question to Edmund.
Okay. Now, I think one of the challenges of Nissan is the approval of the regulations, in particular with the Senate Bill 1382 and the House Bill 4075, for it to happen. Because as manufacturer, they are looking for incentives that would somehow pitch in on the market and somehow would be able to tailor fit to the needs of the users as well on some fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, like as what mentioned by Sekiguchi-san, that and Sir Vivek, that parking and toll taxes are for free for EVs are one of the things that they are looking for. And here in the Philippines, like in terms of exempted on the color coding scheme, as what is similar to Indonesia, that would be a big plus. And in terms of VAT, 12% VAT, in terms of purchasing it, that would be another. So although we have been able to lobby the excise tax as if you're going to buy or sell the EVs, there's another set of problem that they are facing, which is on the tariffs.
Okay, would anybody else like to take a quick stab at that question?
Yeah, sure, James. It's, this is not just about the Philippines, but it's really across the globe. And I'll give you one example of Japan, where we are finally, the number of charging stations in Japan has exceeded the number of gas stations, which is a good sign. But we came to that point with the support of the government and local municipalities, relentless support, and also a clear determination to enhance the electrified vehicles in Japan. Yet, the number of electric vehicles in Tokyo is still very low, and there's low penetration. And that is, on one side, is the incentives. And so what the government did starting this January, and they doubled the incentives to around $8,000 per unit. Of course, the terms and conditions apply, but that's the efforts that the government is doing. But the other side, there is still the lack of easy access to the charging stations in Metro Tokyo, where a lot of people live in apartments. So we still have an issue with building the right infrastructure that release the anxieties of owning an electric vehicle, even in Tokyo. So there is a learning curve. I think make an effort, but it has to be a combination, again, on providing incentives and also providing the right infrastructure at the same time. So a lot of lessons learned, but I'm sure in this region, not maybe go full speed across the nation, but in the mega cities, there are a lot of opportunities where we can collaborate with the government and local municipalities, and also with companies like electric company, to boost making the infrastructure and incentives that allow people to buy electric vehicle or electrified cars.
Thank you very much, Sekiguchi-san. I'm feeling so great about this because we're able to tap into so many different minds, and some markets are so much ahead of ours, like Japan you mentioned about. I'm shocked at that. They've exceeded the number of gasoline stations, yet it still poses a problem because a lot of people live in buildings. So yes, there's so much to discuss here. Let me throw a question first to Dusit, because being in charge of policy and understanding government's role in this, what role do public and private parties play in creating a zero emissions society? Could you share with us perhaps some of your insight? Should ASEAN governments start banning ICE vehicles from its cities, or is that a little bit too radical?
Yes. Thank you, James, for good introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. Zero emission society might sound extreme, but it is now a must for every country that commit to the Paris Agreement in order to battle against the global warming. If we focus on transportation sector, zero emission society doesn't mean people use bicycle every day instead of using motor vehicle, but it means the use of electric vehicle or EV. That because electric vehicle emits zero CO2, so we have to encourage the people to change some kind of transportation, for example, passenger car, commercial vehicle, and motorcycle. Government agencies are essential partners with private party in accelerating the movement of EV society. I think the main role for the government is, like everyone said, to promote the use of EV nationwide and creating demand side through multiple measures. As Vivek said before, tax benefit is the most attractive incentive. So what the government should do is to give financial support or tax benefit to consumer to encourage them to switch from ICE vehicle to the EV. For example, reduction of the excise tax, reduction of the value-added tax in order to make the EV selling price lower and lower. And you know that in some countries such as UK or Germany, the government grant money to consumer for buy new EV. Besides that, I think non-tax support such as exception of the car annual fee, toll fee, or free parking area in government building, or free electric charging or special rate charging at public station. I think this should be provided for the consumer to encourage them to buy a new EV. Another role is about infrastructure and standard. It is very important to build enough public charging stations through the country, at least in the big city and nearby in the beginning period. I think government should give some funding for developing public charging stations and adopting international quality standards for both EV and electric cars. This is to make sure that consumer can find the charging station along the way when EV run out of battery. I believe that with this policy support and the EV market demand is growing, car manufacturer or private sector will speed up their EV production, including the production of battery and traction motor to serve this demand with affordable selling price to consumer. Another important role for car manufacturer is to communicate to the consumer about its safety standard, especially as I said before that in case of flooding, performance and its advantage in terms of the fuel consumption. I think this is the role for the private sector. To the second question about banning ICE vehicle from the city, as known that the government in many countries has announced the policy in banning vehicle with ICE. For example, Netherlands banned ICE car in 2025, 4 years from now. UK is supposed to ban ICE car in 2040. Within ASEAN, I haven't heard that any ASEAN member country announced ban ICE car. And know that only Vietnam government start banning ICE motorcycle in 2035. Sharing with you the Thailand experience. At this moment, Thai government has not announced banning ICE policy. Instead, the government set the target of production in the next 10 years. The target 30 and 30 mean in 2030, 30% of Thailand production will be hybrid, plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicle. As Thailand has faced serious PM 2.5 problem which generated from the tailpipe emission of ICE vehicle. So Thai government start thinking about banning ICE policy. However, there are two concerns about the ICE banning policy. The first one is about the demand side, with the fact that Thailand is agriculture-based country. Before COVID-19 pandemic, the car domestic demand is about 1 million units. Let's say that over half of the market is commercial vehicle or pickup truck. That's more Thai farmer and distributor use in commercial purpose. At this moment, I haven't seen any big manufacturer and now their EV production. EV pickup production in Thailand. So if the government wants to ban ICE, this issue should be considered seriously. The second one on the supply side, as you know that Thailand is one of the largest production base in the world with long supply chain in automotive industry. In Thailand, we have many auto part makers, mostly local company. So if the government want to ban ICE vehicle, the target year should be okay for them. It means that auto part makers should have enough time to transform their production into the EV supply chain or to adjust their business to another competitive industry, such as medical devices or parts for the aircraft. Back to the question, should ASEAN governments start banning ICE? My answer is it depends on the market situation and industrial structure of each ASEAN member country. However, as you know that the strength of ASEAN is one single production base, one single market. So that, in my opinion, it's better for ASEAN with car market size about 3.4 million units a year to move in the same direction towards zero emission society or sustainable mobility in the future. Back to you, James.
Thank you very much, Kun Dusit. So much there, so much information there. And what I'm understanding from it is, well, it's certainly not as radical as a ban. It's always going to be how would you call it? Each market has its own different incentives and different programs. So it's almost like asking how long is a piece of string, right? I mean, it really depends where you are, what you're trying to achieve, how fast you're trying to achieve it. And with that, I wanted to ask perhaps Edmund, or should I address this first to Edmund, then I'll get Vivek's comments as well. What can we learn from the other markets that are way ahead of us, such as Norway, the Netherlands, UK? These were all mentioned in various talks today. What can we learn from these markets?
Well, for me, as the key learning is the adoption should be anchored on a very clear motivation. Like in Norway, in addition to controlling its greenhouse gas emissions, it has surplus hydropower, thus in its interest to promote EVs strongly. Now, in Netherlands, it will be one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world that it needs urgently to cut down the greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time showing the world that it could be done in cut down in producing the the ICEs. And in UK, in addition to controlling greenhouse gas emissions, it is strongly positioning itself as a center of innovation and knowledge creation that thus it is expected to play a main player in e-mobility globally. And these motivations shape their approaches to developing the e-mobility market. Considering their surplus power, Norway is able to afford to heavily subsidize EV adoption in the country. In addition to subsidies, Netherlands has adopted a strong policy approach, like setting up of zero emission zones, which is slowly being expanded, and implementing a conventional vehicle phasing out plan. In addition, the government also served an expanded and implementing of a focal point for the cooperation among various stakeholders. This is particularly evident in the introduction of Green Deal approach, which integrates agreements across various stakeholders, thus managing uncertainties. UK, on the other hand, provides strong support and funding to sustainable mobility innovations and research, in addition to the usual subsidies of the EVs. And in the Philippines, EV adoptions could be anchored on climate change control, as we are most vulnerable of energy security and improvement of balance of payments. We import 97% of our petroleum needs, and an industry developed to generate jobs. Similar to the countries mentioned, these motivations should shape our approach to the adoption of the vehicles.
Okay, with Vivek, would you like to take a quick stab at that?
Yes. So for electric vehicle adoption to go up, I think first and foremost, I'll completely agree with the findings of my study that the government needs to play a major role. Secondly, on the part of the ecosystem, we need to have a clearly visible and easily available charging infrastructure. And on the part of electric vehicle makers, they need to treat the electric vehicle as a cool gadget and present it in a very interesting way. So one action point for each segment. And if all three comes together, we will see a good rise of electric vehicle in the region or anywhere else in the world.
Okay, let's move over to a reader's question now, or a viewer's question. This is coming from, doesn't mention the country, but it's coming from Hossam Helmi, and he asks, electrifying 250 million cars is very, very challenging. what about the cost of the required infrastructure integrated into the main city? Can anyone take that question? Would you have figures on that and what the infrastructure would cost to electrify 250 million cars? I guess it's different for every region, but perhaps we can start with Sekiguchi-san.
Well, that's a good question on the cost side of the making infrastructure. Again, I think, as you said, James, I think it has to do with, from which size that we want to start building the ecosystem. And I think in our region, I think our approach is how we can build the proof point where such ecosystem may be able to work. We are currently in a dialogue with one of the specific governments in our region, how to build that ecosystem. Not only about supplying cars, but going beyond the mobility. I touched in my part of the presentation about the going beyond and making the vehicle-to-grid ecosystem. And Nissan has over 100 agreements with the local municipalities in Japan providing leave in case of the natural disaster. Now, we've seen that natural disasters here in our part of Asia and ASEAN as well. So what we need is a learning curve that can we create the ecosystem that will suit and fit, and it's a workable solution, whether in Thailand, Philippines, or Indonesia, and how much would it cost to run that ecosystem. Then I think the next step is how we can expand in respective countries. How much would it cost for the government? How much would it cost for the private sectors to build that ecosystem? I think we need to do a hypothesis, try and error, starting small, making a pilot project among the key stakeholders that allow us to simulate what would it cost us to go from A to B, then B to C. I think that is a workable solution, which we have experienced in other part of the world, and I think that is a practical, workable solution. The important point that I'd like to highlight is that we start by building and making those proof points, that it's not just a dream, it's not just the project, but this electrification work is real, and we have the workable plan working together.
Great. Okay. Once again, we're back to the how long is a piece of string, because there's just so many different solutions, so many different applications we can put to make it work in your market. And this is why we're hearing from different experts from all around. Let's hit another viewer question here. This one is coming from Ju Len Liao, and asks, according to the survey, intention to buy an electrified vehicle as a next purchase is actually down. On average, the proportion of people who answered certainly is down significantly from 51% to 37%. The people who answered no has more than doubled to 8%. People who said probably are up slightly. So why the bullishness on electrification? Can anyone take that question? What do you think that barrier is?
Yeah, so since this is about survey, I think I should be the one who should be taking this question. So first and foremost, we have to see this in context. What we saw in 2018 and what we saw in 2020, there is a big factor of COVID. And as I highlighted, there are several other factors such as oil prices, declining income, declining economies, which have played a very important role in affecting the customer psyche. So you have to take that into consideration. And secondly, what needs to happen is we also need to see what else has changed between these times. So what has happened in COVID times when most of the countries underwent a lockdown is they saw that the air quality has actually gone up. So it was like a real life experiment that what happens if you stop all the vehicles from running on the road for like 7 days, and suddenly your air became a lot clearer, and suddenly you could start seeing things which are distant. And because of which the entire government's attitudes, regulators' attitudes, as well as the customers' attitude have changed towards electric vehicle, because they do understand that if there are tailpipe emission in the city is eliminated, the air quality will definitely go up. So if you compare just number to number, it has gone down, but it's not apple to apple comparison because of a big COVID factor, which panned out. And this study happened right after COVID. We did the field work in October, November. So it was right after COVID. And if you adjust the entire thing to the COVID impact, we see 1 on 3 customers is great. And that's why we are quite bullish about uh, electric vehicle outlook in this region.
Thank you very much, Vivek. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to try and take as many more viewer questions because we have them here and they're from all over the globe. We've got one from the Bangkok Post. So I guess Dusit, perhaps I'll address this to you. What is Nissan's strategy in global and Thailand market to stimulus the demand growth of EV? Then maybe Sekiguchi-san could probably speak on behalf of Nissan as well. Dusit?
Yes, as I said before that the price of the selling price of the EV is the main important for the consumer to buy the EV. So as you know that Thai government already gave the excise tax incentive. Right now the excise tax for the EV is 0%, but the price of the EV is still very expensive. So I think what the government want to do is to give more incentive in terms of non-tax benefit. As I said before that if we provide some advantage, for example, use the toll free or free charging rate for in public charging station, or even free parking area in the government building. So I think this will encourage the consumer to buy the EV. And the very important thing is that the government want to encourage the Thai manufacturer, including Nissan, to continue their production in Thailand. I mean about EV, because Nissan is one of the manufacturers that have the right to make the EV in Thailand. So I think we try to make the business environment to help the consumer and also the car manufacturer to go to the target of the government that we want to make the production rate of EV in Thailand.
Thank you very much, Dusit. Now, because the question was specifically for Nissan strategy, perhaps we could get your comments, Sekiguchi-san.
Yeah, certainly. Just following up on Dusit's point on how the Thai government is supporting this journey of electrification. One of the reasons behind where we invested millions of bahts to Thailand in building the e-power system is one proof point where Nissan is committed not only moving this wave of electrification going forward, but also making a production base in Thailand, and not only for supplying our electrified vehicles for the customers in Thailand, but also outside of Thailand, and including the ones in Japan. So there are two folds. One is that we understand there is a demand for pure electric vehicle, but also there are other forms of electrified mobility or cars that we have to bridge. And meaning bridge is that we still have years to take to set up the infrastructure that are necessary for customers having no anxiety, no stress to moving in with a confidence to the full electrification. But there are some technology that support to bridge it. And we believe Nissan's e-Power is the way of electrified cars that supports the ecosystem of building the electrified world going forward. So focusing on e-Power while focusing and working with the government and key stakeholders to really have this EV to be flying out in the coming years. But our approach is these two ways of electrified models. And I think e-Power, at least for this region, is a good solution so far, giving both, taking away of the anxiety of charging, but while having the feeling of driving the EV, And also what is again important in this, specifically in this region, is the emotional touch of excitement of driving the electric vehicle. But we fully appreciate how much the government is supporting this journey of electrification, and having this base in Thailand is one of the key strategic approach in making Nissan's strategy going forward.
Thank you, Sekiguchi-san. I'm hearing the same word over and over again, government support, government support. Of course, we need the private sector support, but government plays, I think, the top role. And with that, I think we could also look at fleets, kicking things off for countries that perhaps are not quite, the penetration rate is still low. Would you agree with that, Edmund? What roles would fleets play in the electrification of ASEAN mobility, especially for countries that are yet behind Japan, etc.?
Yeah, EVs are expected to play a big role in transport fleets, both in the short term, medium term, and the long term. We can also segmentize them into various markets. In the short term, the light electric vehicles are expected to play a big role in passenger transport, urban logistics, and in the service industries. We are talking about the likes of 2 to 3 wheelers, electric quads, and the mini delivery e-vans or electric vans. The ASEAN market is very price sensitive, and these vehicles are already widely used in China, pushing down component prices, making these products competitive in the region. In some cases, however, while the life cycle costs are lower than ICEs, their initial are significantly higher. Thus, the need for some supporting policies and incentives to accelerate adoption. In the medium term, e-buses are expected to penetrate the region. For now, however, this is only expected from government-led pilot programs. Their costs are more than twice the cost of conventional buses. Thus, assuming that they have life cycle cost parity, most players would rather get 2 diesel buses rather than 1 e-bus, as it will generate double the revenue. Thus, without the government incentives, or unless the program is government-led, it is still hard to see mass adoptions of e-buses in the region. The projected rapid reduction in batteries are expected to change this in the near future, strengthening the arguments of e-bus mass adoption in the medium term. This will be possibly only if coupled with the very strong and deliberate government policies of easing out conventional fleets in the public transport system. And in addition, we are also looking at the wider adoption of EVs in the government, corporate, or even on tourism industry fleets as the charging infrastructure becomes more mature. This could, however, be pushed to the short term with appropriate government policies and incentives. E-mobility sets the transport system for connected and newer concepts of mobility, like mobility as a service. Except for a few countries like Singapore, a lot of things needs to be set up for things becomes first a reality. Under this scenario, the initial cost of the vehicles becomes a non-issue as people pays for the service and not the vehicles, thus opening a wider adoption of the EVs.
Perhaps you could ask Dusit's take on this as well, because fleets in Thailand, have they played a massive role? And if not, what role do they play in the electrification in ASEAN?
Actually, about the fleet, I think that for the EV bus and EV bus, for example, is quite very suitable for the EV, because as you know that the bus is run in the same way, so there is no problem about charging station. So I think if we support for the fleet of the EV bus, but in terms of Thailand, we have the EV bus manufacturer in Thailand, so it's very it's a good strategy to support the EV bus manufacturer in Thailand to build the fleet of the EV bus. And also we are thinking about the ferry EV ferry because in Bangkok we have Chao Phraya River and ferry is one of main transportation in Chao Phraya River. So we are thinking about the bus and the ferry.
Thank you very much, Dusit. Now, I have a couple of questions. That's it, because we're trying to wrap it up. So I'll ask one question to Sekiguchi-san, and the final question, which will be for all of you as well. I'll get a 1 or 2 sentence take on it. But let's start with Sekiguchi-san. I'm very interested to know about the vehicle to grid, because I've driven the Nissan Leaf in Japan and also in the Philippines, and I really do think that that's revolutionary. I think that's going to be the disruptor because it addresses so many different concerns. And one is disaster resilience, and another one also is potentially we could become our own little mini power companies. Would you agree with that? Can you tell us a little bit more about the vehicle to grid?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, the proof point that we have had in Japan and what our Leaf or a pure electric vehicle can do, just more than the mobility is, you know, at the time of the natural disaster, we are able to provide energy from the car itself to homes and schools to support the blackout. And the fully charged Leaf can actually provide energy to a household for 3 to 4 days consecutively. And that we found out is enough to support during those blackout. And once the energy is back, the supply source is back. So that is why we are still continuing to sign agreements with local municipalities, how Nissan be part of helping out the communities and society. And also part of it is a global warming, why we are having so many national disasters, earthquakes, typhoons, and this is more and more increasing. So we are not just making cars for fun to drive, and that's part of it, but how we can provide a sustainable solution in addressing to some of the environment issues that we are facing, and then more we're facing this across ASEAN region as well. And you know, there has been a lot of testing and pilot projects. What we call Nissan Blue Switch is again part of the project that we go beyond the mobility. And again, I mentioned earlier, we have started to discuss with the specific agencies in the government in one of our ASEAN countries to really identify areas where we can support to build the communities and societies, especially anticipating those national disasters that occur from time to time.
Well, it's certainly going to be a very big help, and we're all very excited about that as well. It's like, I don't want to dilute the importance of it, but it's like having a giant power bank that you can connect to your home, and that's just great. Now, let's end this entire forum and this panel discussion by getting all of your thoughts in 1 or 2 sentences. I'll start first from Dusit, and then we'll go around. Is electrifying 250 million cars an impossible dream? Dusit first.
Yeah.
1 or 2 sentences.
For ASEAN market, the consumption for the car is about 3.5 million units per year. I mean, totally 10 ASEAN member country. So if you target at 250 million car, it take about 30 years from now. If today we have 0 electrified vehicle, so it take about 70 years from now to complete the target. But in my opinion, I think only 2 words, nothing impossible. Thank you.
Edmund.
Well, for me, I agree to Sir. Nothing is impossible because as long as there's a collaboration between government and the private sector and would benefit the users, that is really not a question mark, but more so a dream come true.
Vivek, would you like to take a stab?
So I have the problem with the words impossible dream. Dreams are never impossible. Dreams are to be dreamt, and we have to work hard to achieve them. It's certainly a tall order, but nothing is impossible, as they say.
I like that attitude. Nothing is impossible. Sekiguchi-san, your
Well,
turn.
in the last 2 days, I had an opportunity to meet with dealers and customers who are actually having Leaf and Kixi power. And the feedback that I get with the passion, it is not possible. We can all make it together. And I'm very confident of it.
Very good. I'm not sure who said it, but impossible is just another way of spelling I'm possible. Wow. If nobody's taking credit for it, I'll take credit for that line. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, now we are about to close and we're at the end of our session. But kindly wait because it's not over yet. I think I introduced you to our artist who is going to capture all the discussion in pictures. It's now the moment of truth. Let me show you the visualization made by our graphic recorder, Mr. Elliot Lee. Elliot, what you got there for us? And remember, we had an agreement of 5 to 10 pounds shaved off my image. So,
Wow.
oh, look at this.
Wow.
This is a great infographic. Wow.
Wow.
What a nice way of wrapping this whole thing up. That's great. That's just wonderful. Thank you very much, Elliot. Let's leave that there for a little while and enjoy that for just a little while. That was our visualization made by our graphic recorder, Mr. Elliot Lee. What do you guys think? Pop your messages there in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. Personally, I'm happy you got my best side. We have the agreed 5-pound reduction off the face. So thank you very much, Elliot. Thank you also, Sekiguchi-san, Mr. Vaidya, Dusit, and Mr. Araga for joining us in this very insightful discussion. And with that, we've reached the end of our session. So I thank you all very much for joining us from all these 23 countries that you've come in from. And don't forget to visit the website, asia.nissannews.com/futures for all the materials and stay updated on more Nissan Futures events. On behalf of myself, James Deakin, it's been a pleasure being your host and moderator. Take care and stay safe and keep working on those electric dreams. Thank you very much.